When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 18, a journey through dating, relationships, and finding the one. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast.
Hey, Salima, what's happening?
Not much. I'm just really excited for you to be here. I am so thrilled to have you on the show. I'm actually really appreciative that you bring your willingness to share, and I'm equally thankful for your support in taking a stance with me to help break down barriers of mental stigma.
Hey, Salima, listen, you're doing great work in times like these when people are going through heavy doses of stress, anxiety, loneliness. And for you to share other people's stories and give hope out there, I think it's just fantastic work. Keep it up.
Thank you. I really hope that we can normalize mental health and that one day it can be like people tell you that they're going to see a therapist the same way they would say they're going to a walk-in clinic or to see their family doctor. So really want to help to break down those barriers. And again, I'm really thankful that you're on the show with me today doing the same.
Thank you. Pleasure's all mine.
Thank you. Okay. So as we get started, let me give you the skinny of what this podcast is all about. So Dare to Share Your Untold Story is about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And one thing that we know now is that no matter what the story is, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way which remains unseen or hidden away. So my goal for this platform is to serve in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. And my bigger hope is that with a chat like what we're going to have today is really encouraging people to share and tell what people typically have reservations for expressing. And so I'm also hoping to bring forward a trend called the mental beauty rethink. How does the mental beauty rethink sit with you?
It sounds cool. I could actually know more about it. It sounds really interesting.
Well, just like I was saying, right? So when we think mental health, there's a negative connotation behind it, right? Even if you just were to say the words, there is a little bit of some tension for people and some reservation for entering that conversation. So mental beauty, I feel like it's a softer and gentler way of bringing it forward.
Right. It's a spa day, so it's a mental beauty day.
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
Sure. Let's go with that.
That's awesome. Sounds great.
Thank you. Awesome. Are you ready for a deep dive?
Let's do it.
Alrighty then. Give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. How would it read?
I guess if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. How does that sound?
If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. Interesting. Okay, so what does this headline mean to you? Tell me more.
So if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone means regardless of where we are in life, and I'm speaking from my own personal experiences,
Mm-hmm.
is regardless of where you are in life, how low you feel, how helpless you feel, or how vulnerable I felt and how scared I felt, if we want to get out of this rut and this dark hole, we can do it. And I am living proof of that.
I
And that's why I'm
see.
saying if it can happen to me, if I can get out of
Mm-hmm.
it, it can happen to
Mm-hmm.
anyone.
Right. So if you can endure all this pain, there is a way to get out. And so what you're saying is that you've been able to do that.
Yeah. But Selena, I've got a preamble here though. It can't be done alone. We all need a support system. Like I had some wonderful people, and some of it was luck where these people fell in my lap. And then some of it was actually me going out there and making the conscious effort to surround myself by those individuals who could help me progress and move on and become a better
Right.
person.
Absolutely. I totally hear that. It's so great that you mentioned that because your title seemed very powerful. It's simple and powerful. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. But you're right. There is that component of other people being part of your journey.
Yeah. And it's funny you said that because earlier you're talking about the whole mind beauty thing, right? And that's exactly what it is. It's actually spending a day or a week or a month or whatever length of time it is to find that individual who can help you work on your mental health, you know? And like you
Mm-hmm.
said, there's a stigma around it, and people are very fearful to come out and say, hey, I need help here, here, and here. And I think people like you're doing a great job helping saying, hey, it's normal. We all go through it. Now let's get some help and fix things up, right?
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what we're doing here. So, walk us through your untold story. Tell us what it's all about. Tell us about the who and the what and the when, the wheres.
So, Selena, growing up as a kid, I was raised in a house where we didn't have a whole lot when it came to material possessions.
Okay.
My parents were blue collar workers. There was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
stress. My parents were new to the country. They were trying to provide for us. And my father had high blood pressure. He had cholesterol issues and other
Mm-hmm.
health issues. So I guess all this stress and anxiety and health issues and financial issues, it just kind of
Mm-hmm.
toppled. It just took him to a place where he relieved his stress or thought he was relieving his stress by taking it out on me. So there was abuse. It was physical. It was verbal.
Mm-hmm.
It was tough. It was hard. I remember, as an example, I must have been in kindergarten or grade one. We used to live in Edmonton. Coming back from school, we used to walk down this hill, and it was springtime. And because I had to walk down a hill, snow would melt and obviously trickle down, and there'd be like huge puddles of mud. Now, being in kindergarten, grade one, I was just a mischievous child, and I liked walking through the mud. My clothes would be a mess. My socks would be a mess. My shoes, everything. My dad would, physically take out that frustration on me.
Oh my goodness.
And I was just so silly now that I think back. I was such a silly child. The next day I would do it again, knowing what the consequences were, right? But I just wanted to do it.
Yes, but you have to remember though, as a child, just because you know something's not right to do, it's not going to stop you, right? Like you, as a child, you're curious. Children like their habits and they
Exactly.
kind of have like simple pleasures in life. And so I'm assuming that that could have been what was happening for you too.
Exactly. And the thing is, unfortunately, the trade off was pretty horrendous. And
Right.
and that left a lasting effect on me.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about this lasting effect. Tell me more about that.
It just impacted me in every aspect of my life, Selima. I mean, at school, my grades suffered.
Mm-hmm.
I was always constantly seeking attention.
Mm-hmm.
I was a problem child in school, talking out of turn, just being mischievous, like I said.
Mm-hmm.
I struggled to maintain relationships. I didn't have a very good relationship with my father. So we were very distant from each other. It was more based on fear as opposed to love. So I avoided him. Just every aspect that a child, a teenager, maintaining relationships in high school was a challenge for me.
Mm-hmm.
On top of that, we're constantly moving from city to city, from Edmonton to Montreal to Toronto, and so on and so forth. And I couldn't establish. I didn't know how to maintain a relationship because eventually it would break apart, and I would start afresh.
Right.
So I never had someone that I can talk to or someone who can lean on.
Right.
And I think that really impacted my mental development and my social development.
Right. Now, the way you're speaking about what you've gone through now, I can hear that you don't have resentment in what occurred in hindsight, now looking back. And it sounds like you must have gone through some bits of forgiveness and really taking time to reflect on everything that has happened to date. But I'm curious about what that environment was like for you. I mean, you shared an example about when you were in grade one, doing a repeat offense at home, knowing that your father was going to get really upset and you're going to have that wrath. What was that verbal abuse like, or the physical abuse like? What sort of scenarios did you encounter?
Well, I guess that's an example from my early years, right, when I was still developing as a child.
Right.
But then,
Mm-hmm.
even as later on in life, I was about 12 years old, and I was in Montreal at the time. And the way the
Okay.
Quebec education system works is that you're in elementary from kindergarten to grade six, and then from
Mm-hmm.
grade 7 to 11 is high school.
Okay.
So grade six had ended. It was a summertime. We were out for a family walk. And like I said to you, I was constantly seeking attention, or I wanted, just someone to say, "Oh my God, you're so smart. You're such a good kid." I craved it. So
Mm-hmm.
we went for a walk, and I don't know if I really wanted to be a doctor or an engineer, or I didn't want to be, but I just said it out loud. I said, "Hey, when I grow up, I think I want to be a doctor and engineer."
Right.
And as a South Asian kid,
Right.
culturally, your child is supposed to strive for that. And if he or she isn't, then there's an issue, right? So
Right.
so I expected my parents to do the happy dance in the middle of the street. But instead, my father looks at me and says, "I don't think you're smart enough to be a doctor or an engineer." And
Mm-hmm.
and as a 12-year-old, that really hurt. And to this day
Wow.
and age, it still stays with me.
Of course. Did you feel like, wow, even my father doesn't believe in me? Like, what sort of thought went through your mind at that time?
The lasting impression was of sadness. You almost feel
Mm,
like I will never succeed in life. Like no one believes in me. I'm just a nobody.
mm,
And to feel like that as a child, that
yeah,
you can't succeed in life, or that you're nobody, or that you're dumb, or you're stupid, or whatever,
right.
it's a very tough obstacle to overcome.
Yeah,
And again, on top
absolutely.
of that, like I said, there's no one there to say, "Don't worry about it. Just ignore him."
You didn't have a cheerleader. There was no coach, no one cheering you on saying, actually, I think you can.
Right? There's no teacher. There's no one in my life. So I felt very isolated, right, as a child.
Right.
And now that I have my own children, basically I did a 180. And at that point in time, it affected me so badly that during my high school years, I ended up cheating in physics and chemistry because I just thought I'm too stupid to do this. Therefore, the only way for me to pass is by cheating.
So you didn't believe in yourself.
No confidence in myself.
Right.
And now that I think back, through cheating, I had mid 70s and low 80s. This is not studying, not doing anything, just somehow cheating through the exam. And I got decent grades. And I think to myself, had I applied myself, I could have done it.
Right.
And as you get older and you start coming to these realizations, it starts rebuilding your confidence piece by piece. So now that I have kids of my own, I'm very cautious of making sure that I'm constantly giving positive affirmation that, if they say I want to be this, I say, yeah, you can do this, but you can also do this, this, and this as well, because you're so smart. So I don't want
Right.
them to grow up and say, my dad told me I was dumb, or he didn't think I can do this, or didn't believe in me, or
Right.
whatever the case. I don't want that. I'm very, very mindful of that.
So you took a learning of being able to encourage your kids, even if they're telling you something positive, you're sort of widening their horizon of option and possibility, letting them know, like, hey, well, that's great. And you can also do this, or this, any one of these things, right? Like just
Absolutely.
letting them know that they don't have to narrow their focus. Or if you see that maybe they're not striving, or if they're settling for where they're striving, you're using those words of encouragement.
Right.
Okay. So you were able to take that in from your own experience of this.
Yeah, that was one of my major learnings as a child.
Mm-hmm.
And I take that very, very seriously. Because a child is so delicate, and you don't realize it until you grow up and think back to yourself as to how delicate and vulnerable I was.
Right.
So these children are just as delicate and vulnerable as well. So I need to be very mindful of that.
Yeah. When you talk about delicacy of kids, yeah, they have such a sincerity of mind and they don't have the critical skills developed, right? And so we're supposed to take the time to help them expand that,
Right.
right?
Right. And it's tough nowadays too, right? I mean, jobs are demanding. People are
Mm-hmm.
working, 6 days a week. It's tough.
Yeah. So I am curious. Tell me more about how this journey of your upbringing and your childhood and going through the abuse and the physical abuse and the emotional abuse and not really feeling like you had anyone to turn to sort of make sense of the world, to make sense of your world. I'm curious as to how this lends to getting married and taking those next steps in those parts of and that part of your life.
Interesting. So I got married when I was 26 years old,
Mm-hmm.
and I was not mentally ready to take on such a serious relationship because a marriage is a full time job, it's a full time commitment.
Mm-hmm.
And just like your everyday job, you really can't take any days off. So I lacked the ability to communicate properly because I was never taught how to communicate. It was just through aggression when I had to be talked to. And that's
Right.
what I knew. Affection and all these things are missing from my life. And then she also had her own issues from her childhood. So I guess you got me in my dark place, and then she had her issues, and we get together, and all of a sudden you got the World War III happening every single day,
Mm-hmm.
and it was hard. And again, we were young, we didn't know any better. Through no one's fault, we just didn't know how to get out of it. We didn't know how to fix it. And as you know, in anger, when you say things, the resentment just builds and builds and builds to the
Right.
point where you really can't go back and undo what's been said.
Right. So when you're talking about all of this, and you mentioned when you were younger, not receiving things like affection and being spoken to appropriately and being shown kindness and how to navigate situations, is that what you're saying? Is that you actually didn't know how to then show affection and speak appropriately and navigate situations when there's moments of difficulty in the marriage?
Correct. We
Okay.
just didn't have an example to look at and say, this is how a relationship should function.
Right.
I didn't, she didn't. And like I said, it was no one's fault. We just didn't have that reference point.
Mm-hmm.
So when you keep talking in anger and you keep saying things that are hurtful, eventually that resentment builds up where you're at a point now you don't want to deal with the person anymore. You don't really want to acknowledge them anymore. And things just fall apart.
Yeah, so it amplifies, it gets bigger and bigger, and then it just starts breaking into pieces.
Exactly.
Right.
And in my family, when eventually we did get divorced, I was the first one to get divorced. So it was a huge thing
Right.
that happened. And my mom was in denial. A lot of people were in denial in my family, and they thought eventually we would just get back somehow. I go, no, no, that's not happening.
Right.
That ship has sailed. But for me personally, that was my low because the upbringing I want to give to my children that I thought I would give to my children, I couldn't give it in the same manner anymore because their home was completely destroyed. And I didn't know how to compensate for that. And I don't think we can. So it's this regret that I have. I think I did them wrong. And there's no way for me to go back and fix that because the trauma they went through, the fear they went through,
Hmm.
I know it's affected them in some ways, but unfortunately, I can't do anything to help with that. And to me, that bugs me a lot as a father.
Of course. I mean, the life circumstances obviously were not made easy. They were trying. I can see how you would relate to it in this way. I'm curious if you've ever talked to your children about it now, in hindsight, knowing that they obviously did go through their own turmoil as you went through yours. Have you guys ever had an open conversation about it?
I've tried. The nature of my children is that my older one he's very reserved. He doesn't say a lot.
Mm,
So he
okay.
doesn't open up. And I don't know if it's because of the divorce that he's become reserved or whether
Hmm.
it was the way he was genetically made.
Hmm.
I don't know. And my middle one is more talkative, but I don't think he's old enough yet where we can have that mature conversation.
Right.
I don't think he's at that point yet.
But it sounds like you've started the conversations, right? And you've started it so that they have had it at least in small doses.
Yes, yes,
And your eldest son, if he's more reserved and not talking, it doesn't mean he's not taking it in and processing.
yes. But I haven't had that one-on-one sit down and saying, "Hey
Right.
guys, this is what happened. This is how it is, and
Yeah.
this is how I feel." We haven't had that yet.
And maybe one day you might be able to do that.
I would like to, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm listening to your story and I'm thinking about so many different thoughts are going through my mind. I have so many curiosities. And, I'm going back to when you talked about your childhood and not even just the abuse, but immigrating into the country and having to adjust to blue collar jobs and noticing that your parents' health maybe was not withstanding certain things and financial struggles and all the stress that your father was under. Are you aware of any like intergenerational complexities, like of anything that lends to before coming to Canada or anything else in terms of familial themes?
Yeah, there's tons of them. The South Asian culture, the Indian culture, is very conservative by nature.
Okay.
So, and what I mean by conservative is that whatever happens in your four walls of your house stays within the four walls of your house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, children are being taught that if there's abuse or if there's an issue or if anything is wrong, call 911, speak to a teacher, speak to a counselor. It's being ingrained in children at a very young age.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have that education system back then. And we're getting back in the 80s now. In the 80s, we
Right.
were not taught that. What we did know, what we were taught was that whatever happens in the family stays in the family. So you
Right.
just kind of lived with it and dealt with it. So that was one of the, intercultural differences. The second one was it was very conservative. So basically the way everyone was brought up was that the male dominates. The male makes the last call.
Mm-hmm.
And my father kind of ran the house that way. Like, I'm the man of the house. I
Mm-hmm.
will run it the way I want to run it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that was passed on or passed down from his father too?
It was passed down, yes. It's
Mm-hmm.
been generational.
Yeah.
And then also, speaking about my dad and his dad, I guess, the passing on, my grandfather was an alcoholic to make things worse. So my
Mm-hmm.
father didn't have the best upbringing either. So in
Mm-hmm.
fairness to him, I mean, I can hold, like you said earlier, I've kind of moved on and forgiven and this and that. It's because
Mm-hmm.
I had to sit down and say, okay, this happened to me, but why did it happen to me? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
it's not entirely his fault because he himself didn't know any better. It's like me and my first marriage. I didn't know any
Mm-hmm.
better. He was in that same boat where his father was an alcoholic. He would come home drunk every night from work. And then he would create a scene in the neighborhood on the street.
Mm-hmm.
And my father now tells us that, going to school, he used to walk to school, would be very embarrassing for him because he felt that everyone was staring at him. So he felt insecure and the inferior complex. So when he talks about himself, it's like he's talking about me almost.
Mm.
So I find that very interesting.
Parallels in your stories.
Yeah, there's a lot of parallels.
Okay.
My learning, this is my personal takeaway in life, is that if someone is being mean to you or rude, and obviously there's limits to being mean and rude and whatever, right? There's a limit to everything. But do take a second to try and forgive and try and understand maybe this person themselves is going through a lot of pain and try and have pity and remorse on them as opposed to anger and hatred. And it might make you as a victim feel a little better and maybe help solve the issue in a better way.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like a really good reflective piece to take in, right? And sort through when you're going through one of those difficult moments to be able to get open and curious about what else is going on for someone else, for sure.
Yeah, it's helped me move on in life. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
With all of the abuse that you endured and all of that stuff that you were going through, did you use Bollywood as your way to cope through that time?
So, for those of you who are listening who've never seen a Bollywood movie from the 70s, 80s, or 90s up until the early 2000s, they used to be basically it was Walt Disney for adults. And what I mean by that is that everything was perfect, right? Like you had the perfect siblings, the perfect girlfriend, the perfect
Mm-hmm.
boyfriend, the perfect parents, house. Everything was perfect. You know what
Okay.
I mean? Like every piece of furniture was in place.
Right.
Everything was perfect. You fall in love, and 20 people show up out of nowhere and start dancing to celebrate your love, right? So everything was so Walt Disney like.
Mm-hmm.
And when your real life is nothing like that, doesn't even resemble it for a second, then that becomes your escape route because then you start daydreaming almost of wanting that type of life and that type of setup where everyone is so lovey-dovey. So That was my fantasy. That was my escape.
Okay, the escapism of that perfect life.
Right.
Did that translate to how you felt your life should be as well?
Yeah, I did. Actually, I was a very naive kid, and as a kid, I'd be like, when I grow up, my life is going to be like that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
reality kicks in, and then
Right.
your boss isn't as nice, and it goes as planned, right? And Bollywood has stayed with me now. It's become a fabric of who I am. I enjoy it. I pass it on
Mm,
to my children to the point now where I'm actually trying to bring a Bollywood show. I mean, that's the impact it had on me.
right. I can see that, when you shared with me all about the things that you've been up to and venturing off to. Yeah, Bollywood has definitely been coming up in the forefront for you. So it's going to be really exciting to see what unfolds.
And it's funny, as you were saying that, I was kind of thinking back to my childhood. The
Mm-hmm.
only time when it was happy, happy in my house is
Mm-hmm.
when the four of us, me, my brother, and I, and my parents,
Mm-hmm.
watched a Bollywood movie.
Right. Oh,
When that movie
really?
ended, it was like, oh no, what happens next, right?
Right. So you guys all kind of were in that fantasy
We
space.
all enjoyed it, yeah.
You could fully immerse yourself in and take it in and enjoy it.
Yeah, and thank God, people complain that Bollywood movies from back in the days were like 4 hours long. For me, it was a blessing in disguise because that meant 4 hours a piece. So it was great.
Right. Right. Yeah. If life was really not fulfilling for you, a really unhappy place, for sure, that's like 4 hours of bliss, right?
A bliss, yeah. Yeah. I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
going to get put down or yelled at or screamed or sworn at or hit. So it was great.
Mm-hmm. So, I'm a little curious. We've talked a little bit about, you getting married a little bit too soon before you were mentally ready for it, emotionally fit for it. And we've talked about the Bollywood as a form of escapism for yourself. And I think you mentioned some stuff about dating, right? So, is that something that happened for you after your divorce?
Yeah. Yeah. It's kind of going back to kind of tie things in. You're asking about intercultural differences and all that.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up in the 70s and 80s and the 90s, dating was not allowed. So it was tabooed. It was like, as a family, we're going to find you a nice girl and then you're going to get married and you're going to live happily ever after, have a bunch of kids, and that's it. So
So, did you have an arranged marriage?
it wasn't arranged, but
Okay,
my parents played a huge role in accepting her.
I see.
So had my parents said, no, we don't like her, I probably would not have married her.
Right. So, there was a little bit of a structure to it, right? Like a process.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's not like I bring someone home and then we have dinner and I announce to the family, hey, we're getting married. Hopefully you guys show up. It wasn't like that.
It was more a decision that they make.
Yeah, you're someone that I like. Now can I marry her, please? Type of thing.
Right. So, asking rather than telling.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now to kind of come back to what you were saying with the dating. But then when
Mm-hmm.
the divorce happened, I was like, okay, I need to start living my life my way. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because listening to my parents and my family and the cultural norms, quote unquote, clearly
Mm-hmm.
hasn't worked in my favor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I'm not saying that it doesn't work for everyone. Some people are extremely happy, have had great lives. But for me personally, and from my experience, it didn't work for me. And I got out there, started dating, and quite frankly, like I said, I didn't have a whole lot of experience. So it was therapy for me.
Dating therapy.
Dating
So,
therapy, right? Yeah, yeah, you said that quite well.
so tell me more about dating therapy. I'm intrigued here.
No confidence,
Right.
has no idea how modern dating works, has never
Mm-hmm.
been on a dating app.
So we're not just talking any kind of dating. We're now going straight into online dating
We're
also.
going full throttle, everything,
Full
right? Full
throttle.
throttle. Like
Okay.
I'm trying to make up for lost time, and
Right.
it was almost like I had to catch up 20 years of lost time.
20 years. Right.
Whatever I couldn't do in my early 20s, or whatever I couldn't do in my teen years, or during my marriage, because my marriage wasn't that great either. So I felt 10 years of that was lost too. So I wanted
Right.
to create moments and scenarios that I wish I had had when I was younger or in a previous part of my life.
Okay.
But that's kind of changed or evolved as I started meeting people. In the beginning, I didn't know how to date.
Dating etiquette was not something that you were familiar with.
I had no idea. I
Yeah.
had no idea. And now that I think back to my early days, I'm so embarrassed of the questions I asked or whatever. I'm so
Oh, no, I'm
dumb.
curious. What kind of questions were you asking?
Like, I would show up, and you have to keep in mind that the influence that my parents had on me, the culture had on me, was
Hmm.
deeply, deeply ingrained. And it took me
Right.
many years to shed it. So
Of
some of the
course.
questions I would ask would be the first date, and I met them for maybe 10, 15 minutes, and I'd say, so are you dating to just, casually date and have fun? Are you looking for a husband? Or like, what's your purpose of dating, right? They would look at me like, whoa, this is
You really
really
did full
awkward.
throttle.
Like, it was just so weird. And now I'm so embarrassed when I think back, like, wow, I can't believe I said that, or just these awkward questions. And
Hmm.
so anyway, so as I got the experience and I figured out how it works, I learned new terms like ghosting. I didn't know what ghosting was until it happened to me. I'm like, oh,
Right.
this woman is such a whatever, right? And then I realized, oh, this is normal. Ghosting is what everyone does, and so it was just a huge learning curve for me. But as I kind of learned the do's and don'ts, and talking to some of my single friends who were
Hmm.
dating and this and that, I then started to ask the right questions and
Hmm.
approach the whole dating in the right manner. And throughout this process, I became more confident. And it's very perverse to a certain degree that as women started sharing their experiences with me, I came to this realization that other people have also gone through what I have gone through. It's actually a common thing. And it doesn't matter really where you're from in this globe. You can be from anywhere. And a lot of people have somewhat similar stories, and unfortunately, even worse. So that almost made me feel good knowing that you're not alone out there. And on top of that, I also came to this realization speaking to people, and kind of self discovery, that I'm not as stupid as people thought I was, or I'm not as useless as people thought I was. And that affected my career and the way I approached work and my health,
Right.
and my relationships in general, where I started feeling more empowered. And now all
Yeah.
the decisions I was making as to who I'm going to be with and how I'm going to go about dating and how I'm going to raise my children, it became my decision.
Mhm. It sounds like you were able to get curious about this whole process of dating once you kind of got comfortably uncomfortable with the dating etiquette, as you were mentioning. And it's as if like you were performing these little mini human experiments, being very deliberate in paying attention to all these different perspectives to take in. And it really sounds like you took a lot of risks. And it sounds like you were free to be yourself. Like there was some sort of inner permission that you gave yourself that got you to that place of feeling empowered. It's kind of what I'm hearing.
You're right, but that wasn't the initial intention.
Yeah, you may not have had that deliberate intention, but it sounds like there was, this is how it evolved. This was the outcome.
Right.
Hmm.
And then the interesting part, like, again, like I said, I was this geeky brown kid who had this cultural thing ingrained in him that people only
Hmm.
date to get married. By the third date, you should know whether or not you're marrying that person, right? That's the mindset
Right.
I had. And that's how I was raised. So once I got past that and realized, no, it's a process and you got to get to know the person and communication and the commitment and all these little things that makes this whole relationship thing work. Like you said, it evolved into a therapy. It evolved into me realizing that it's okay what you went through, but now you just have to overcome it and have confidence in yourself.
Right. What a powerful story that you've been sharing. This is really amazing. You know, when people come to see me in the therapy room, people are usually like kind of in one of three places. Some are getting started, some are in the middle, and some are looking back in their journey of what they're undertaking. And so I'm curious for your story, for your journey, would you say that now you're looking back, or are you in the middle or somehow getting started?
A little bit of all of them, and let me explain where I'm coming from.
Okay.
I'm looking back in the sense that I found my true love. So I am happily married now.
Hmm. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. We're closing in on a year, so that's great. And, she still loves me, so it's fantastic.
She still loves you.
So that's great. So in that regard, I'm looking back, right?
Hmm.
I am in the middle where every day I want to make sure that I don't repeat my mistakes. So I'm very cautious of that. I'm always analyzing everything. So I always feel after like your first day on the job, you got to prove yourself all over again.
Mm-hmm.
So in that regard, I'm still, proving myself. But then I'm also in
Okay.
the beginning, whereas I want to become even a better version of who I was. Because in
Mm-hmm.
the corporate world, we have this saying that the day you become complacent is the day you should update your resume,
Mm-hmm.
meaning your time in this position is now coming to an end, and people will eventually realize it and cut you out. So,
Right.
so from that perspective, I'm all free. But where you're coming from, I'm now looking back at my life because I feel I'm in a happy spot now.
That's really a beautiful way of articulating it. I really enjoyed hearing your process about that. So I want to ask you, how has your untold story affected your mental health? Like we've spoken about little bits throughout our conversation to now. I guess I'm curious about what impact would you say that you experienced specifically on your mental health while you were growing up and while you were navigating all of these parts that you felt that you had to do on your own? I think you mentioned the inferiority complex previously,
Yep.
like earlier. What does that mean to you? How did that play a role here?
Well, inferior complex, what it means to me is constantly thinking in the back of your mind that you're not good enough, you don't belong, you'll
Hmm.
never succeed, you're just a failure.
So, as a child, you were living in fear, constantly scared.
I was always, yeah, I was scared. I was
Hmm.
lonely.
Hmm.
I never felt I was good enough.
Okay.
And I just craved attention, I guess.
When we experience these sorts of journeys, there's a lot of undesirable emotions that come up, right? They're really uncomfortable. Do you recall what sort of emotions you experienced? I know you've talked a little bit about fear and anger and resentment. Are there any others?
Those are basically it. Also, a lot of sadness too as a child.
Sadness.
You're just not in a good place. And as a child, right, like we really can't sit and process our emotions. We can think back and say, I probably felt that way. But in that point in time, you really don't know what you're going through because your vocabulary just isn't expansive enough.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all of the above. I mean, a child who feels lonely, who feels abused, who feels he's a failure. I mean, whatever negative emotions he or she can go through, I felt it.
Right, right. Any other aspects of your mental health that you recall being affected?
Uh, my confidence.
Yeah,
I ended up becoming an accountant because I thought that was all I was capable of doing.
right.
That was the backup plan for me. My confidence was severely affected. My ability to maintain relationships or even to function in a social
Mm-hmm.
setting was below par. I just couldn't. I would sometimes say inappropriate things just to garner attention. I would
Mm-hmm.
try and be the class clown just to garner attention. It
Mm-hmm.
didn't get me any friends, but it definitely got me in a lot of trouble. And then when I went home, it was even worse because my father would find out about it.
But it sounds like underneath all of that, you were just yearning for some affection and love and someone to notice you, to see you.
You're right. And it's actually in my adult years as I saw movies and read books and spoke to, highly decorated professionals like yourself, is when I realized that people will act ruthless or mischievous or just be rambunctious is because they're craving attention. They want to be noticed. They want someone to say, yes, I see you, right? And I care for you.
So you were looking for that.
I was looking for that as a child, but I didn't realize I was looking for that until I became older and looked and reflected on my past.
Right. Sometimes as a child, we don't have the words to describe the experience,
Right,
right?
right, exactly.
So, what is your key message to the listeners of our show?
Selena, I guess the headline would say it all. If it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. So if someone's going through a tough junction in their life, just have faith, seek help, surround yourself by positive people, and just remember that everything eventually passes. We have to learn to forgive, and we have to remember that if we go through a traumatic experience, it's not our fault.
Mhm.
As a child, I always felt that this is happening to me, therefore I must be an idiot.
The cause and effect, maybe not actually entirely accurate.
Exactly. Just the ability to forgive and to self heal and just seek help when if you feel like you need help. Not to be
Mhm.
embarrassed by it or ashamed of it.
I really like that you said that because, sometimes I notice that people are seeking help. It's very secretive, right? And so I notice that when individuals are able to openly seek help, it's a lot more liberating and a lot more relieving that they're not holding on to another type of weight.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned something about, it's not going to be like this all the time. I think you alluded to those words.
Right, it'll pass.
It'll pass. Right. So it's temporary. So no matter how crappy it is, like whatever unfortunate situation that you're coming to heads with, it does pass. It is temporary.
And also I'm assuming most of the listeners are adults. Again, this is an assumption, but for the adults out there, if they are going through a tough time, this is what dating taught me, I guess, going back to the whole dating thing, is if you're going through a tough time, it's your responsibility to get out of it. Because sometimes you have to be your own savior.
Be your own savior. Wonderful. So I'm curious, what is that game-changing mantra or inspirational quote or book or whatever it is that speaks to you that's been helpful for you as you've worked through your journey?
Everyone wants to quote some philosopher or poet or whatever. I have this thing on my WhatsApp. So it says, "Be nice. Everyone is fighting a battle." I have no idea where I got this from. And it could have been on a bus stop, like on some billboard or something. I don't know. but I just heard it somewhere and I wrote it down on my WhatsApp headline. And that's really my mantra. And that's what I go by. And
be nice. Everyone is fighting a battle.
Everyone's fighting a battle.
These are familiar words, a message I've heard before for sure.
It must be, because like I said, it didn't come from a book or anything, so I don't know where I got it from.
Well, I think it's short and simple, easy to remember, and very powerful.
Yeah.
So, what is a cause or an organization that has been impactful to you on your journey that you would like to give a shout out to?
So, right after my divorce, I joined Meetup. And Meetup, for those of you who don't know, is an app. It's a free app where you can log on, create an account, and there's a whole bunch of different groups. There's like walking groups and exercise groups and comedy clubs and so on and so forth. And there was one there that said free yoga. And being South Asian, we love free, right? If it's free, we'll show up. Even if we don't need it, it's free, we'll take it, right?
Right. Okay.
So we just showed up.
Nice.
And I like it's free. It was a Tuesday night. There's nothing happening. And I'll be honest with you, I went thinking I might meet another lady friend, right? So I went. So I show up there and it was called the Sahaj Yoga. And it was totally not what I expected. It wasn't the physical yoga that we're talking about because it was very meditative. It was about healing yourself and overcoming your past and not living in the future and things of that nature. So they came into my life at a junction when I needed someone. I needed someone to get me out of my situation. So they kind of became a family for me for about 2 years. And I'm no longer part of that community, I guess. For whatever reason, it just wasn't, my journey with them was only for 2 years. And after that, for whatever reason, I just didn't feel it was the right place for me.
It served your purpose for what you needed when you needed it, and you graduated.
And I graduated.
To the next phase of your life, right?
Exactly. Well said.
Okay. Wonderful. That's really great. I'm so happy to hear that you found a place that gave you that sense of belonging and that you were able to learn to meditate and come back to your true self, your true core. It sounds like that was wonderful to experience over those 2 years.
Yeah, and just, for everyone out there, for me personally, meditation has been very powerful what it does. It just gives you this inner energy that lives inside you. You're not even aware of it until you awaken it. And it's been magical for me. So I encourage everyone to try it.
Yeah. I like how you said it's an awakening energy from inside, because I totally feel that, yeah, when you are feeling that refreshed, then you're leading from like a full cup, right?
Yeah.
And so everything else in life, the perspective on everything shifts, your attitude and your mannerisms and everything changes. And I think it is magical. I like that you used the word magical. It really is magical.
And just take that a step further, and I think you kind of alluded to it, when you are feeling confident, when your mannerisms do change, people take note of it, and then they're behavior towards you, their attitude towards you also changes.
It can influence. Yeah, it can definitely influence someone else.
100%.
And I think that the big thing here is what you said, because you went on a journey for yourself, right? So it's like your inner knowing was very clear. You really went in. So from an inner core level, you really worked hard to replenish yourself.
I did, but Salima, I was at a point in my life where if I didn't do it then, it would have never happened for me. I would have been this miserable human till the day I expired. And I made a conscious decision. Like I said earlier, you've got to be your own savior. So, God or whatever you believe in gave me the power to, or the mindset to go out and seek help and to do what I had to do.
Right. That's wonderful. You just dared yourself to share. Congratulations.
Thanks, Aliva. Thanks for the encouragement and the support.
Oh, you're welcome. How was the experience for you?
It was great. It was fantastic. I enjoyed it. Yeah, it was lots of fun.
That's really good to hear. And again, I just want to express my gratitude for your willingness to dare, for your willingness to share, and your willingness to tell. Having this raw conversation about what it was like to grow up in an abusive environment and how all of your experiences translated into your interpersonal relationships and finding your true love. You really showed up with a great deal of vulnerability today. So thank you for your courage.
Thank you. You're welcome. And I just wanted to say that, listen, if it wasn't for platforms like these stories would not be shared. So kudos to, individuals like yourself who actually make it their job to help other people. I think it's fantastic.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being a part of Dare to Share Your Untold Story and helping to be a voice in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma. To all of our listeners, if you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.